everyone may be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, this witness has been previously sworn to testify truthfully. Mr. Berry, you may proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Dwyer, welcome.
Good morning.
Would you please introduce yourself to the jury and tell them what you do for a living?
Good morning. My name is Dr. Jessica Dwyer. That's D as in dog, W-Y-E-R. I'm the Chief Medical Examiner and Director of the Crime Lab for the Southwestern Institute of Forensic Sciences in Dallas County.
And can you tell me, as a medical examiner, what is sort of your job description?
So a medical examiner is the same thing as a forensic pathologist. Pathology is an area of medicine that's focused on the study of disease. Forensic pathology is even more specific. It focuses on the study of death. So that's basically what I do.
And can you tell us what kind of background, training, experience you've had to qualify you for the job that you currently hold?
Sure. I have a Bachelor of Science degree in Animal Science from Texas A&M University in College Station, Texas. Following that, I obtained a medical degree from the University of Texas Health Science Center of San Antonio, which is in San Antonio, Texas. Following that, I completed a combined anatomic and clinical pathology residency with the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And then following that, I did a year of specialized training in forensic pathology that's called a fellowship. And that was with the Office of the Medical Examiner of Allegheny County, which is also in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And then along the way, there are 3 licensing exams that you have to take in order to practice medicine in the United States. Passed all of those on the first attempt. And I also have 3 board certifications in anatomic, clinical, and forensic pathology, all of which I passed on the first attempt.
And since you have become a medical examiner with the Southwest Institute of Forensic Sciences, have you, I guess, been given other duties than just the level of medical examiner?
Yes, sir. As the Director and Chief Medical Examiner, I have a lot of administrative duties as well, but I do still perform autopsies every day.
Or do you have supervisory duties over the others?
Yes.
And with regard to an autopsy that was performed on the date of, I believe it was December 3rd of 2022, approximately 7:30 a.m. on an individual by the name of Athena Strand. Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
And so I just stated the date it was on, but how was it that you first became aware of this case? And was it different? Were you just on duty that day, or did you specifically go to perform the autopsy on this particular day?
I was scheduled for work that day, so whatever cases are reported to the office that we ultimately bring in for an examination are your task for the day. So in this case was reported from the Justice of the Peace in Wise County, and they had requested us to perform the autopsy, and that was my assignment for the day.
And according to your understanding, what was that day in relation to the day where her body was located?
So I believe the body, because this was a Saturday morning, I do remember it was on a Saturday. I believe her body was discovered Friday evening, and the case was reported to us somewhere in the late evening, early morning on Saturday, the December 3rd.
And is that common or unusual as far as an autopsy being performed so quickly? How does it normally take place?
No, for cases that are reported to our office and brought in for an examination, we try to maintain a 24-hour turnaround time, so this is not unique.
Okay, you talk real fast.
I'll try. I know. I'll try.
Your forward, not down.
Yes, sir.
With regard to the autopsy on Athena Strand, can you kind of just walk us through just the basic process of what happens from the time that a body is delivered to the medical examiner's office until the point that you encounter it?
So the process of an autopsy?
Well, the process of getting it to you.
Okay.
Yes.
So in this instance, the body is actually brought to our facility, specifically the morgue area. We do scan the body in. The body bag is sealed with a plastic tag that we keep closed until the time of the examination. But as the body is scanned into the building, it doesn't mean that we are automatically starting the autopsy at that point. So we have a cooler that they stay in until the autopsy is performed. And then not the process of the autopsy, just the intake part, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So once you are ready to begin the process of the autopsy, let me ask you this first of all. What's the purpose of the cooler?
So it is kept at a cold temperature to just preserve the condition of the body.
And does that slow the rate of something?
Decomposition, slows the rate of decomposition, yes.
And are there some documents that you usually have to have in order to do an autopsy?
There are some documents that we typically have before the autopsy, yes.
And can you kind of describe what that is?
So our building is a 24-hour day, 7-day-a-week operation, but I am not physically in the building 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Who answers the phone for our facility are our forensic investigators. So anytime a death is reported to our facility, it's the death investigator that is taking that information, determining if this case needs to actually be brought in for an examination, etc. So they will draft a report of all the things that were reported to them by whoever is reporting the death. So it's called an investigator narrative. So that's given to the medical examiner prior to the case, so we have an idea as to what's the circumstances of the death and kind of helps us triage our cases for the day.
So you had some understanding of what was the circumstances before you did the autopsy?
Yes, sir.
Do you also have to be given some official authorization from somebody in the county that it comes from in order for you to do an autopsy?
So because I'm an employee of Dallas County is my jurisdiction. However, when another county is requesting our office to do an autopsy, they have to provide an authorization form stating we're requesting Dallas County to perform this autopsy, correct?
Now, as you are conducting an autopsy, do you take notes, fill out diagrams, things like that, to record your findings so that later you can put them in your autopsy report?
Yes, sir.
And can you describe what that's called?
We kind of colloquially refer to them as our bench notes. Essentially, it's all the notes from the case that I'm going to then take to my desk after I'm done with the case so I can officially memorialize it in a more organized, neat fashion into an autopsy report.
Now, before an autopsy report comes out, is there another short form report that is often issued by the medical examiners before the final autopsy report?
So we do have a cause of death report that you can request through our office, and what it is it's on official letterhead, and it just provides the cause and manner of death for the decedent with the signature of the pathologist performing that examination.
And then, of course, the final document would be your examination report. What is that called?
You're talking about the finalized autopsy report?
Yes.
Yes, that's the neat version. It also incorporates any findings from toxicology or some ancillary testing that we may or may not request, but that is the comprehensive finalized report.
May I approach your honor?
Yes, sir.
Dr. Dwyer, I'm going to show you 4 different documents. State's Exhibit number 271, do you recognize that?
Yes, sir.
And what is State's Exhibit number 271?
This is the autopsy authorization form for decedent Athena Strand that's signed by Judge Jan Morrow, who is the Justice of the Peace for Precinct 1 in Wise County, Texas.
And State's Exhibit number 272, you may have to look through that and see if you recognize all the pages.
Yes, sir.
And what is State's Exhibit number 272?
This is a copy of my bench notes.
Okay. And chronologically, that would come during the autopsy itself, correct?
Correct, yes.
All right. Now, following the autopsy, the short form report, State's Exhibit 273?
Yes, this is the cause of death report, signed by me.
All right. And then finally, State's Exhibit number 274.
Yes, sir. This is a copy of the finalized autopsy report.
Thank you. Do the documents, both of the bench notes, the cause of death report, and the autopsy itself, do those document your findings during the autopsy of Athena Strand on December 3rd, 2022?
Yes, sir.
I will offer into evidence States Exhibit 271, 272, 273, and 274.
States Exhibits 271 through 274 are admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I publish?
Yes.
We'll start with States Exhibit number 274. I'm going to leave all this up here because it shows us what the page number is as we're looking at it on your autopsy. So as we look at States Exhibit 274, it's titled, what is it titled?
Autopsy report.
Okay. Do you see on there the date and approximate time that the body was found?
Yes, sir.
And what is that for purposes of the record?
So date of death is based on when she was found, which was December 2nd, 2022 at 8:45 p.m.
And then what is the date and time that the autopsy itself was performed according to this document?
Where it says examination performed December 3rd, 2022 at 7:30 a.m.
Now, with regard to the autopsy itself, before the autopsy begins, is there an evidence collection? You can turn that off for a second. Is there an evidence collection process that takes place?
Yes.
And can you describe that for the jury, please?
Depending on the type of or suspicion of death, we may collect trace evidence at the autopsy. In the event that there's a firearm potentially used in the decedent's death, we would test for gunpowder residue, or we may collect hair, we may collect fingernails, or a blood sample to ultimately be dried on a blood card. Those are some examples of trace evidence we collect.
And was that done in this particular case?
Yes, sir.
And of those things that were collected, can you describe them, what was collected in this particular case?
Yes. So we did collect a blood card, so it has 4 spots of dried blood on it. That's to preserve her DNA. We have a sample of her scalp hair, which we also use for DNA. When her body was actually received with her hands covered with brown paper bags, we will keep those brown paper bags. I did perform gunshot residue testing on her hands just because I didn't know what kind of death we were potentially dealing with when I did the case. And then also collected fingernail clippings from both of her hands, her right and left hand. And then we also collected a sexual activity kit.
And the sexual activity kit, can you describe what that is?
So exactly that. It is evidence that may be related to sexual activity. So it's typically swabs and pubic hair collection. So for a man, it would be swabs from the penis and penile urethra, in addition to the anus and the oral cavity or the mouth. For a female, it would be oral cavity, vagina, both the outside and the inside, and also the anus.
And with regard to those things, once they're collected, what happens to them?
They're packaged in a kit, and they ultimately get transferred to our evidence registration. Since this is an out-of-county case, it doesn't automatically go to our crime lab. The county would then have to request testing or analysis of that kit from our crime lab, or they may send it elsewhere, but it gets sent to our evidence registration.
And, yeah, hold on for a second. I need to ask a question real quick. May I approach, Ron?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to show you what has been marked for identification purposes as 260, states 269 and states 270. Does it appear to have the evidence tape from the Dallas County medical examiner?
Yes, with my initials too.
And can you describe, first of all, what would be in states exhibit number 269?
So a lot of this writing in yellow tape is not mine, but what I can tell you is that this is typically how I package evidence from a homicide or potential homicide. And there is a sticker itemizing this particular item that correlates to the number for this decedent. And then we will seal the top of the bag with tape and red evidence tape, which I initial. But the yellow tape and everything else, I don't know who did that.
And what would the contents be? I'm sorry.
That's okay. Everything that I just listed that I collected would be in there with the exception of the sexual activity kit.
And then states exhibit number 270?
Yes, sir. This is the sexual activity kit.
Okay. And these both relate to the body of Athena Strand and the autopsy done on December 3rd, 2022?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. I will offer states exhibit number 269 and 270 into evidence.
No objection.
States exhibits 269 and 270 are admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Dwyer, during this process of conducting an autopsy, is there someone there, either yourself or someone at your immediate direction, that takes photographs of this process?
No, I take the photographs.
Okay. And what is the purpose of taking the photographs?
So we take photographs on every postmortem examination or autopsy. There's standard photographs we do for every case, and then in some cases they may require additional photographs, essentially documenting with photographic evidence any of your findings.
And do the photographs that you have, are they given specific monikers as far as the name of the photograph itself that are unique, at least within that case, so that there's no mix-up, two things have the same name?
So any decedent that is examined in our office is given what we call a unique identifying number. It always starts with IFS and the year that the autopsy is performed. And so all of the photographs pertaining to this decedent will be labeled with that IFS number.
And approximately, if you know, how many photographs were taken in this case? Yeah.
I don't know the exact number.
Prior to court, though, I think I showed you approximately 38 of the total number of photographs that were taken by you during this autopsy. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And do you have an opinion as to whether it would aid the jury in understanding your testimony to, maybe not here in court today, but at some point have an opportunity to view those photographs?
Yes, sir.
Okay. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
Dr. Dwyer, the reason we're doing it this way is to avoid unintentionally displaying photographs that we do not at this time intend to display.
Okay.
So each of the photographs that I'm going to ask you about has been covered with a slip cover, so that if I ask you about it, you're going to have to slide the slip cover or the photograph up, but just if you be careful not to display it unintentionally.
Sure.
All right, thank you. At this point, I'm going to ask you to look at these. Have you seen prior to court today what I would call a contact sheet that has the different state's exhibit numbers that go with the different photographs in this case?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I'm going to show you that. I'm not offering it into evidence, but would aid in your going through these
Okay.
to be able to see that.
Thank you.
Mr. Berry, let's mark that, and we'll admit it as a record purpose.
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, we spoke about that before we came back, and that's no objection.
Okay.
If we add that to the record also.
Okay.
And that would be, I believe, 286 for purposes of the record. Thank you. I put it here on the top right corner. The court reporter wants me to put it on the bottom right, but I didn't want to cover anything up. So if you would use this during your
Thank you.
testimony.
You offer 286 for the record.
Yes, sir.
Any objections?
No, Your Honor, as long as it's not going to be admitted or false.
Okay. 286 is admitted for purposes of the record.
Regarding the autopsy of Athena Strand, can you tell us how does she come to the medical examiner's office, in what state?
So, are you talking about when we actually are you asking for my observation when we initially opened the body bag and my initial view of the body?
Well, I mean, let's talk about the body bag first of all.
Okay.
What is the body bag?
So, decedents are typically transferred to and from our facility within a plastic pouch that is a body bag, just so you can maintain privacy and they can be transferred in and out of the facility discreetly
Okay.
and preserve evidence.
And if there's any additional debris, fibers, other things that have come off of the body, is it also to help preserve those things?
Yes.
Okay. And do you go about the process of, is there some type of a procedure that is done even before the body is removed from the body bag?
Yes. So let me also backtrack. We work with when I do an autopsy, I work with an autopsy technician, and we work side by side. So they are ultimately the ones that will go and retrieve the body from our cooler. In addition, before the autopsy, they can do a postmortem X-ray, which is just like what you're familiar with from a hospital, and we're just looking for any potential foreign material that we would want to collect, any evidentiary items. And then the body is brought to the autopsy station, and then we break the seal, open the body bag, and I will document the condition of the body with photographs. We typically refer to those as is photographs, because it's before we do anything to the body.
And were those things done in this particular case?
Yes, sir.
And what can you tell us whether or not there were any foreign objects that were identified as part of that X-ray?
No.
Okay. Now, with regard to the body itself, you said that you took some as-is photographs, and I would ask you to refer in your book there to, and if you need to remove those from that book to be more discreet, however you need to do it, it's
Okay.
fine.
Thank you.
But State's Exhibit number 231 and 232, could you personally look at those and tell me if those are the as-is photographs that you were talking about?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And we're going to go through this process in a way where, rather than displaying them, I'm going to just ask you to describe
Sure.
what you're seeing for purposes of the record. And that way, if there's any question about it later, they can refer back to your testimony.
Okay.
So with regard to State's Exhibit number 231 and 232, the as-is photographs, would you please describe what you're looking at in those photographs?
So there are two of them because one is the upper half of her body, including her head and face, and then the second one is the lower half of her body, including her legs and feet. And so basically how I received her is that she is naked, there's no clothing, and both of her hands are covered with brown paper bags, as I referred to previously, that are actually secured around her wrists with tape. And then her body was covered with kind of a brownish dirt silt appearance, and there was also fragments of vegetation within the body bag and within her scalp hair.
And just for understanding for the jury, when you take the photograph, is there anything that is covered up on the body as you are taking the photograph?
No.
Okay. Those documents, though, State's Exhibit number 231 and 232, have certain portions of that photograph been covered just for discretion's sake.
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, let's go ahead. We're going to look at your autopsy report, and I think we can do this without the light off. The first thing you do is the external examination. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And can you just kind of describe in general terms what is involved in the external examination?
So the external examination is also standard process for any postmortem examination. And I always describe it as I start on one side of the body, say a foot, work my way up the entire side of that body to the head, and then to the opposite side of the body. And what I'm looking for is evidence of natural disease, evidence of trauma, any potentially identifying features like hair color, eye color, tattoos, scars, etc. Lots of different things. And once I'm done kind of looking at, and then lastly we will roll the body so that I can see the back of the body. And then once that's complete, that's the end of the external examination.
And as part of this external examination, do you photograph the body both before and after it is, I guess for lack of a better word, cleaned?
Yes, sir.
Can you describe, once the as-is photographs are taken, what happens next?
So once the as-is photographs are taken, we would collect trace evidence, if again, depending on the type of case, but you would not want to do that after you've cleaned the body. So we'll collect any trace evidence, and then fingerprint the body, and then we will clean the body. And that way you remove any clothing, any evidence of medical intervention, any dirt, blood, etc., so that you can see the body in its entirety.
Now, I noticed in your report, and I believe we're still on page 1, that you talked about the hair being wet.
Yes, sir.
Was that from being cleaned or something else?
No, it was received that way.
And commonly in an autopsy, if a person had been wearing clothes at the time that they were deceased, what would you receive? Just the body or something else?
If they had clothing on at the time that they were pronounced, the clothing would still be on the body, or clothing that may be with the body come with the body.
And was any clothing brought to you with the body of Athena Strand?
No, sir.
Now, with regard to the evidence of the body itself, can you just kind of give us, you weigh the body?
Yes, sir.
Right? And what was the weight of this little girl?
The weight is 67 pounds.
And what was the height or measurement?
52 inches.
And in layman's terms, or feet and inches? I
Oh
don't
man,
know.
make me do math. I'm showing my Tarrant County son. So 60 inches is 5 feet, so she's 8 inches below that, so that's...
4 feet, 4 inches?
Sounds good, yes. I'm so embarrassed.
That's all right. I think the judge would say you did go to Texas A&M. So.
Oh, no.
So did I.
Oh.
With regard to, so Athena is 67 pounds, 4 feet 4 inches, is that correct? And what was some of the observations that you made during the external examination of Athena's body?
So I already mentioned that she was received naked, no clothing received with the body. There's no jewelry on the body. In addition, like I said, the surfaces of the body were covered with brown dirt or silt, and there was fragments of brown vegetation within the scalp hair and on the surfaces of her body. She also has what we call pruning or washerwoman changes in the skin of her hands and feet. Other than that, she had some evidence of injury, which is much more extensive than just what I'm describing.
And let's talk about that. Not specifically what the injuries are at this point, but when you open the body bag and you see the body of this little girl, describe for the jury sort of where you're seeing the injuries on her body just from first look.
My initial impression, the first thing I thought is that she is completely congested from the neck up, meaning that it's much darker due to blood kind of being in that area of the body. Trying to think of a better way to describe congested, but it was just, you could tell that there was something going on in the head and neck area. That's before we even cleaned the body.
And congestion, is that related? It's hard. I want to kind of give a lay person's understanding what that means.
It's the best way to describe it is blood's backed up in the vasculature.
And I'm not sure I understand anymore, but what's vasculature?
So all the blood vessels that circulate blood throughout your body are the vasculature system. So it's arteries, veins, and connecting those two are capillaries.
And is that something that you see in certain types of deaths versus others?
Yes?
And can you describe that for the jury, please?
Well, let me say congestion on its own as an isolated finding can be nonspecific. And you can see it in sudden cardiac deaths. You can see it in drownings. You can see it in asphyxial type deaths. So it's nondescript on its own, but a constellation of findings can be more helpful when you're making a diagnosis.
And when you're saying a constellation of findings, are you talking about the overall findings taken together?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, once she was cleaned up, could you still see this congestion, the blood near the skin, from her basically mid-chest to the top of her head?
Yes, sir.
And would the fact, I guess I have to frame it to you in a hypothetical situation, if a person had received injuries close to the time of their death and then was immediately put in a cooler type situation, either a colder body of water or a cooler like you have in your laboratory, would that essentially sort of,
Objection, Your Honor, leading.
what would that do? Sorry.
Okay, your objection leading is overruled based on the last statement.
So if I'm repeating your question,
Yes.
if someone had those findings and then died, would they be altered by being put into a cooler?
Yes.
No.
Okay. Would it slow the normal rate of something that might change the appearance over time?
So the coolness of the cooler is to preserve the condition of the body by decreasing the rate of decomposition. That's just a known fact that decomposition slows when it's cold.
So if a body were put into a colder body of water in November, would that also help slow the rate of decomposition?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, with regard to the body of Athena Strand, we're talking about the external examination. Were there further, go to the next page. This is the page 2, it states exhibit number 274. You kind of went on to describe some more of the findings in the external examination.
Yes, sir.
And I don't necessarily feel like you have to read every word, but if you would give it sort of a synopsis and then maybe also explain as best you can in layperson's terms so we can understand it as well.
Sure, just starting from the top.
Yes.
So basically, I even mentioned that the head and face exhibit trauma. There's generalized congestion of the head and face, which I just mentioned. I note that her hair is blonde and it's wavy and it's long and that it's damp. And then her eyes are green in color. When you look at the whites of her eyes and the lining of her eyes, you see florid petechial hemorrhages, which are florid just means they're everywhere. Petechial hemorrhages specifically refer to these tiny pinpoint hemorrhages that you see throughout the eyes. Let's see. She has her teeth are kind of a mixture of what we call deciduous teeth and erupting adult teeth, which is appropriate for a 7-year-old. The neck has trauma, the chest is trauma. I did not appreciate any trauma on her vagina or within her vagina. The vaginal hymen is present and it's intact. I did examine her anus. She had some fecal material on the perianal skin, but I did not see any trauma to her anus. And then her extremities, so the arms and the legs, also showed trauma. Her fingernails are all intact, but the fingernails themselves are dirty. The toenails are also short and dirty. The soles of her feet are dirty, but otherwise unremarkable. And then the back has trauma.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit as we go through this, because there are some photographs I believe that correspond to some of these things. Specifically, State's Exhibit number 235. Could you examine that and tell me what you see in that photograph?
Sorry, I kind of juggled this. Yes, sir.
Could you just give a brief description of what's shown in that photograph?
So a standard photograph that we take on all of our postmortem examinations is what we call an identification photograph. So it will be a picture of the decedent's face with a number placard with that IFS number, the unique identifying number for that decedent.
And on that placard, if you use that as a cutoff in the picture, meaning you can see what's below and what's above it, do you see a marked difference between what is displayed above that placard from her mid-chest up than what's below that placard?
Yes, sir.
Can you describe what that difference is?
So again, you can still appreciate the congestion in her head and face, and you can see multiple types of blunt force injuries, essentially from the middle of her upper chest to the top of her head.
And going on to look at, there's a series of them. I believe it's 236, 237, 238, 239, 240, and 241. Do those show her eyes on both sides of her face?
Yes, sir.
And you describe, I believe, what you referred to as florid petechial hemorrhages. We're not going to be showing these to the jury at this point, so can you kind of describe, as you're looking at the photograph itself, whichever photographs you think best shows it, identify that photograph and describe what you see there as the florid petechial hemorrhages.
Sorry, let me... So in State's Exhibit 236 and 238, they are photographs of the right eye, showing petechial hemorrhages in the whites of the eye, which is called the sclera, and within the lining of the eyes, which is called the conjunctiva. And then same for State's Exhibit 239 and 241.
And what is the significance or possible significance of finding these florid petechial hemorrhages in the eyes, such as in the case of Athena Strand?
Again, as an isolated finding, can be very nonspecific. You can see them in different types of deaths. Sometimes sudden cardiac death, you can have those. Sometimes depending on what position that you die in, you can see those. So as an isolated finding, petechial hemorrhages are not diagnostic, but again, taken in a constellation of findings can be.
And taken into the constellation of findings in this case, was that significant to you?
Yes,
In what way?
because it wasn't just petechial hemorrhages in the eyes, it was her entire face, basically her entire head, with all of that congestion. So it implies that blood is pooling in that region of the head.
And what are the possible causes of that kind of blood pooling in those regions of the head?
So my big concern was that there was an asphyxial component to this death.
And you say asphyxial component, can you explain that to the jury?
Asphyxia is a fancy word. It's a mechanism for how somebody can die, and there's different types of asphyxial deaths, because you don't just spontaneously asphyxiate. There needs to be an explanation for why it occurred. But basically it means that the body is starved of oxygen. Either the blood supply is cut off or not able to supply blood, especially to the brain or the airway, or the person is not able to actually breathe and get that oxygen into the body. So examples of asphyxial death: smothering, strangulation, mechanical asphyxia, chemical asphyxia. Carbon monoxide is an example, but that's an overview of asphyxia.
Understood. So you said smothering and strangulation are one of the possible
Two
signs.
possibilities.
Two possibilities of asphyxia.
Yes.
So, and you understand that in this particular case, that the defendant, Tanner Horn, has pled guilty to the offense that he was charged with.
Yes, sir.
And that was by causing the death of Athena Strand by smothering and or strangling and or asphyxiating Athena Strand with his hands, his feet, or his body.
Yes, sir.
Does that make sense, given the finding that you're describing right here?
Yes, sir.
Okay. In addition, do you, first of all, with asphyxia itself, is that a type of blunt force trauma? Or strangling and smothering and strangulation?
Yes.
Okay.
Right, we had a question clarified.
The question was, with asphyxia itself, is that a type of blunt force trauma or strangling and smuggling
Strangulation.
If I can,
and strangulation?
strangulation and smothering, are those a type of blunt force trauma?
Blunt force trauma would indicate that the body comes in contact with a blunt object. That could fall, those both could fall under the umbrella of blunt force injuries.
So, in addition to that type of blunt force trauma, if you see other indications of blunt force trauma,
Yes, sir.
can you just from the opening photographs, kind of describe what you're seeing that indicates to you that there was other blunt force trauma?
So, types of blunt force trauma would be as something as superficial as what we call an abrasion or a scrape. You know, it's a friction injury on the surface of the skin. Or it could go deeper to where you have an impact and you actually break the vasculature under the skin, and now you have a contusion, also known as a bruise. Or it could go so far as the blunt object overcomes the elasticity of the skin to where now you've got it creates a gash, or what we call a laceration. So abrasions, contusions, and lacerations are all examples of blunt force injuries. What I saw on the decedent was a mixture of abrasions and contusions. I did not see any lacerations on the skin.
But it had both the abrasions, which are what you described at a more skin level, is that correct?
Yes.
And then the contusions, which are deeper into the musculature of the body, is that right?
Yes, under the skin. So it would be what we call the subcutaneous soft tissues or the muscles, all of the above.
All right. So let's go on here. Before you go into the actual evidence of injuries, do you know any potential scars, things like that on the body, so that you can distinguish that from the injuries themselves.
Yes.
And as part of your bench notes that you keep, do you have a diagram related to potential scars or other things?
Yes.
And what is the purpose of doing that prior to documenting, or I don't know if you do it prior to or after? What order do you
No,
do?
same time. I just, for organization purposes, I don't like to have too much messy writing all on the same page. So this is what I do for all of my cases. I have a separate page for like the potentially identifying features, hair color, eye color, scars, tattoos, etc. And then I do a separate page for any evidence of injury. But they're done concomitantly
All right. That's a big word. What does that mean?
at the same time.
At the same time. All right, thank you. With regard to, once you've done that, and were there any major scarring or other injuries, evidence of prior injuries on the body of Athena Strand?
She just kind of has some scattered scars. I think somewhere on the extremities, on the abdomen, but nothing specific.
Anything unusual for a active, precocious 7-year-old girl?
No.
Okay. Now, with regard to the evidence of injuries, let's start talking about that. You talk in your report on the bottom of page 2, you begin with what you call blunt force injuries. Can you distinguish, just as far as terminology, what the difference is between blunt force injuries and some other types of injuries?
So I described previously that a blunt force injury is when the body comes in contact with a blunt object. Contrast to that would be sharp force injuries, where the body comes in contact with a sharp object like a knife or scissors, a razor blade, etc. Those are a different pattern of injuries. We do not have those here, but just to contrast it with blunt force injuries.
Thank you. Now, when you are beginning to document the blunt force injuries on the body of Athena Strand, do you start in a certain area and go other areas after that?
Yes, it's my convention. I like to start with the head and neck, and then I'll move to the trunk and then the extremities. But that's just my convention.
Okay. And is that something that you do on every autopsy?
Yes, sir.
All right. So let's talk about the head and the neck of Athena Strand.
Okay.
Because that's the order that is in your autopsy, correct?
Yes, sir.
And I want you to kind of give your basic findings, and if you need to, we're going to talk about some of the photographs that go with those in a moment, but
Okay.
if you need to stop and explain a word, because you know we all won't understand it, if you do that, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. So I'm just going to kind of read what I have written here, but for the head and neck area, so starting with on the forehead, there's a 1.5 inch focus of patterned abrasions that are on the right side of her forehead. So they're abrasions because they're a superficial injury of the skin, but they have this zigzag, almost like a tread-like pattern on the right side of her forehead. And then she also has a 3/4 inch contusion on the middle of her forehead. She has a 3/4 inch contusion above the lateral aspect of her left eyebrow. She has more of those patterned abrasions, the zigzag patterned abrasions and abraded contusions that actually go across both of her eye areas, across the entire nose, from the root to the bulb. This is the bulb of the nose for me. And also across her mid-face, including the cheeks, the philtrum, which is the space between the nose and the upper lip, and she even has it a little bit on her upper lip as well. She also has a 2 by 2 inches abraded contusion on the right temple area of her face. She has a linear abrasion that's 1 1/4 inches just below her left eye. She has a 1/2 inch pale blue contusion of the left cheek that is just anterior to her left ear. She also has a small contusion, it's a 1/4 inch, that's on the helix of her ear, which is the loopy part of your ear. And she has a 1/2 inch contusion on the posterior aspect of her left ear. And then she also has a red contusion just posterior to her left ear, kind of in this area. She has a 3/8 inch contusion of the lower left cheek. She has a small contusion, it's 1/8 of an inch on the right side of her upper lip. when you actually pull up the upper lip and you see this black coat of skin that connects the lip to the gums, that's called the frenulum. Just left of that, she's got another contusion of her gums in that area. That's 1/2 inch. She has a very small superficial laceration on the interior of the left side of her lower lip. That's 1/16 of an inch. And then she also has, I'm just going to be real, instead of being descriptive, she has what look like bite marks. It's really a curvilinear series of lacerations that correspond with her upper teeth. She has bite marks on the surface of her tongue. There is a 1-inch linear abrasion on the submental region of her head that's under the chin. She's got a contusion of the right side of the submental region of her head. And then she has a 1/2 inch focus and then a larger 1.5 inch focus where the skin is kind of a discolored gray-brown. And that also had a pattern of abrasions that is different than the zigzag pattern I was seeing on her face. This pattern is square and it looks more like a grate or like a mesh pattern, and that's on the left side of her jaw. She also has more of those zigzag tread-like patterned abraded contusions across the anterior aspect of her neck and the middle of her upper chest. And then she has a 1 3/4 inches linear abraded contusion of the lateral aspect of the right side of her lower neck. And then on the back of her neck, she has a little focus. It's a 3/8 inch abraded contusion, but there's more of those floor petechial hemorrhages that you can even see on the back of her neck.
All right, that's a whole lot.
Yes, sir.
Was there any area on her head, neck, shoulders, face, back of her head, top of her head, back of her back, top of her chest, shoulders that did not have some evidence of injuries?
All of those areas had injury.
And can you render an opinion as to whether those came from one blow or more than one blow?
No, that would be indicative of multiple impact.
And I don't know if you took the time to go through and count how many times that she would have had to be impacted to have the kind of injuries that you saw. But do you have some number in mind?
Multiple.
Would you say you saw 10 injuries, more than 10 injuries?
That's the answer, Your Honor.
Sustained.
All right, so we're going on to the next. Well, let's talk about the photographs first, okay, with regard to these injuries. State's Exhibit number 242 and 243. What area of injuries are we looking at in those two photographs?
I'm sorry, you started with State's Exhibit 242 and ended where?
And 243. Just
Just those two. State's Exhibit 242 is a photograph documenting the injuries on the forehead that I just described. State's Exhibit 243 is also injuries on the forehead that I just described.
And do those particular injuries, you said that they had some type of pattern to them, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And can you describe what you're looking at there as best you can for the jury?
Just how I said it, it's a kind of a zigzag pattern. It almost looks like tread of some sort.
And in those photographs, as well as State's Exhibit number 245, do you have, I guess this is true in all your photographs, do you have some type of measuring device in the photograph so that you can give a reference when you're looking at it as to how big or small those tread patterns are?
Yes, so all of these photographs have a sticker that has a 1-inch scale on it, also with a unique identifying number for the decedent, so that when the sticker is right underneath the area that you're documenting, you can have an idea of the size.
And I asked you before, of the photographs that we have available to us, was there one particular photograph that you felt like could best show this tread pattern that you are referring
I mean, there's several, if you want a close-up or if you want a more global.
But one that has the measuring device close in proximity so that you're able to see it well.
Yes,
And which number is that?
States Exhibit 245.
Okay. And so if you just take that one out of the notebook and just set it to the side, if you would. Not the
Just the
picture
page.
itself, the whole page. We'll leave that for now.
Okay.
I'll come back to it in a little while. Now I want you to talk about well, first of all, what does State's Exhibit number 245, what part of her body does that show, and what do you see as to describe it to the jury?
It's primarily her face, and there is the sticker I was just talking about with the scale. It's just under her lower lip, so you can just see all of the injuries that I previously described that are on her face.
And this tread pattern that you're observing, did it appear to be like one single placement of that tread pattern, or more than one?
More than one.
Okay. And is there a difference, in your opinion, to stomping injuries versus pressing injuries?
Yes.
And can you tell the jury what that is?
So, in my opinion, it would be stomping is with the foot, but has force to it, whereas pressing, I mean, that doesn't necessarily have to be the foot, but pressing means it's just held against the surface of the body, not with any sort of force.
Okay. Well, I'm trying to determine, you say not with any sort of force, does it take some force?
Some degree of force, correct.
In order for these injuries to be visible?
Yes.
Okay. But would you expect other associated injuries if it were stomping versus pressing?
Yes.
And what would those associated injuries be?
I mean, I would think that especially if it was on the face, you have a lot of delicate bones that are in the face, so I would expect there to be some fracturing with a stomping injury.
Are these injuries considered by you to be abrasions or contusions or mixture?
Mixture.
Okay. And kind of explain, as you're looking at it, where you see abrasions, where you see contusions? On this photograph, States.
On this photograph. So on States Exhibit 45, again, it's all of those types of injuries that you see primarily just in the face area. The forehead, the nose, both eye areas, cheeks, and even the lips.
Where's there associated damage? You say contusions goes into the musculature.
Yes.
Is there contusions associated with these injuries in her face itself?
Not from this picture. She had some contusions well, that's not true. She had some on her forehead. She had one on the lower left cheek area, on her right lip, and then also under the chin.
With regard to, let's go on to States Exhibit number 246 and 247. 246, 247, could you describe what those are?
These are both photographs of the right side of her head. 246 is kind of further away. 247 is more up close. And you can see the blunt force injuries I described previously that are on the right side of her head.
And on the right side of her face, as well as on the front of her face, did she have this same tread pattern that you can see in the photographs?
Yes.
Now going on to States Exhibit number 248, and I believe we've already looked at 244, but 248, does that show the other side of her face?
States Exhibit 248 is the left side of her face.
And then I think it was 244, which is that also the left side?
That's the left side of her head, so you can kind of see it's further away than 248, which is more up close to the left side of her face.
And you described some of the contusions, I think, were on that side of her face.
Yes, sir.
And for a contusion rather than abrasion, is it more or less force that is generally needed to cause a contusion versus an abrasion?
More.
Now, on that same side of the face, you described, and I'm going to refer you to State's Exhibit number 249, you described something around or associated with her left ear.
Yes, sir.
Okay, could you describe what that is?
So she had let me find it in my report.
I believe it's
Sorry.
referring to your report.
Yes,
for
okay,
purposes.
here it is. She had contusions measuring up to a 1/4 inch on the helix of the ear, which I said is the top of the ear here. And she had a 1/2 inch contusion on the posterior aspect of her left ear, in addition to a contusion on the part of the head that's behind the left ear.
And you talked about a pale blue contusion on her lower left cheek.
Yes,
Where is that specifically, like you point out in your own body?
here.
Okay. And associated with that injury, was there a different type of pattern that you could observe?
So the other area where the skin was kind of discolored and also had this square focus of pattern abrasions is on the left side of her jaw, kind of in this area.
Understood. Now, let's talk about her mouth. You talked about a contusion on her upper lip, I believe.
Yes.
And if you're looking at State's Exhibit number 251, is that displayed in that photograph?
Yes.
Can you tell us, for purposes for the jury, what about that you noted that on her upper lip?
That it's all I noted is it's a 1/8 inch contusion of the right side of her upper lip, right here.
When people get fat lips, for various reasons, but this one, did it have a markings associated with it other than swelling, or is
No, sir. Just discoloration. That looks like a bruise.
discoloration? I guess that's what, when I say markings, that's what I mean by discoloration is your word. Okay, you talked about some of the things on the inside of the mouth. And we have some photographs, just for purposes of the record. I'm not going to ask you to look at all of them, but I'm referring you to State's Exhibit 253 and State's Exhibit 253. You noted some injuries that were inside of her mouth, I believe.
Yes.
Can you describe those, please?
State's Exhibit 252 is a picture of the lower lip pulled down so that you can see the line of her gums or gingiva, and you can see that there are some petechial hemorrhages within the gum line. 253 is a picture of her upper lip pulled up, so that again you can see there's even petechial contusions there, and petechial hemorrhages there, and there is a contusion on the left side at the gum line.
So up inside of her mouth, where the gums basically go up and then come back
Meet
down.
the cheek, essentially.
Cheek to the gums, is
Yes.
that right?
And then State's Exhibit 254 is another picture of her lower lip pulled down, and you can see that there is this small laceration, so it's an actual small gash, but it's 1/16 of an inch, so it's small, but it's of the mucosa or the surface of the left side of the inside of her lower lip.
And was that consistent with some type of mechanism causing that injury that you?
It's in
See,
proximity.
Waiting.
Overruled.
What do you believe caused that, or could have caused it?
That laceration is in proximity to one of her mandibular teeth, so it's possible that that's from impact with the tooth.
Okay. Now, you also described a moment ago some biting injuries.
Mm-hmm.
Where were those located?
So those are on the surface of the tongue. So if you stick your tongue out, just right on the top, and it's a curvilinear pattern of these kind of spaced out lacerations that are consistent with teeth marks.
And we don't have a photograph in evidence of this, but it is, can you describe what you did in order to determine the depth and the extent of those injuries?
Yes. So part of the autopsy for everybody, we actually will remove the neck organs, including the tongue. And so when that occurred, I could see the bite marks, and if you actually dissected down into the musculature of the tongue, there was even some hemorrhage right underneath those lacerations. So they're real injuries. The body reacted to them.
So, and we probably would go into this at some point, but is there a way that you can tell if somebody is still alive when they receive an injury versus already deceased?
So with antemortem injuries, so before the person is dead, I mean, you're probably familiar with this. When you get a scrape, your body reacts to it and it becomes red. But in the postmortem period, the body's not reacting to it anymore, and so it takes on a more dried, kind of tan brown appearance because there's no vital reaction to it. So you can tell if an injury is sustained antemortem or if it's postmortem.
An antemortem, what does that mean?
Before death.
And so because there's bleeding associated with it.
Correct.
Right? Is that the type of injury that you saw on her tongue?
Yes.
That there was bleeding associated?
Yes.
And you talked about the hemorrhage that took place associated with this injury. Would that take some type of force of her biting down on her own tongue for that to occur?
That's possible.
Okay. Well, you said teeth marks. Did it look like it was somebody else's teeth marks?
No, no.
Right, so it would have been her own,
Yes.
clamping down on her own tongue. Is that
Yes.
correct? Now, with regard to going on to, I guess, down the neck a little bit, you looking at page 3. Good point. Every injury we've talked about so far, those are those. Of those classifications, antemortem versus postmortem, can you tell us what those injuries are?
Antemortem.
Okay. So prior to death.
Yes.
All of those blows
Yes.
on her head, her face, her shoulders, her neck, back of her head, top of her head, all occurred antemortem. Is that right?
Yes.
And for purposes of the record, or for the jury, does that mean while she was still alive?
Yes.
Looking at page 3, you're still going on the head and neck area, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. So at one point on that, you say there is a 1-inch abrasion on the middle of the submental region of the head, and then you, in parentheses, under the chin. And there's a red abraded contusion on the right side of the submental region of the head. Can you just explain what submental is?
So this area directly under the chin. So not quite neck, but it's just this particular area.
And can you look at State's Exhibit number 256?
Yes.
And is that display the injury we're talking about?
Yes, sir.
And can you describe for the jury what you're looking at, please?
So this picture is of directly under the chin, the submental region of the head. The little marker with the case number and the scale is right underneath it. And what you can see is that 1-inch linear abrasion that's on the middle, and then you've got an abraded contusion right next to it on the right side.
And then we already talked about 250. You said there was a pattern abrasion on her left lower jaw line. Is that
Yes,
correct?
correct.
Different than the zigzag pattern.
Yes, sir.
Going on, you stated there is a diffuse band-like distribution of zigzag tread-like pattern of braided contusions extending across the anterior aspect of the neck and upper chest.
Yes, sir.
Can you describe, or in layman's terms, explain what that means?
So the same kind of zigzag tread-like patterns that I described on the face, you can also see across the anterior aspect of the neck and even just into the upper aspect of the middle of her chest.
And are those something that is difficult to see, or is it something that is plainly apparent to you?
It's pretty obvious to me, yes.
Okay. And those injuries, if you look at 257, 258, there is no 259, and then 260. If you look at those and tell me whether or not those fairly and accurately represent that injury that you just described.
Did you say 260 as well, or just 250?
Yes, 257, 258, and 260.
Yes, sir.
Okay. On 260, do you see a little bit more defined area on part of that photograph that is not necessarily part of the zigzag pattern, but is something that you noted?
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
So this picture, you can see the zigzag pattern across her anterior aspect of her neck and middle of the upper chest, and then there's also what looks like a contusion kind of right here at the kind of at the base of the right side of her neck, almost the anterior aspect of her right shoulder.
Is it, and when you say contusion, is that something that you then, during your internal examination, determined that that was below surface level?
Yes.
Okay. And were there other contusions across her neck and chest area, clavicle, that were different from the zigzag patterns?
Just that they weren't patterned, but you had abraded contusions, abrasions, contusions, all in that area, yes.
And abraded contusion, what does that mean?
It's kind of a mixture of both an abrasion and contusion.
Okay, I got you. Now I understand. I'm thinking of like hair braids, so it's abraded.
Abraded.
It's an abrasion.
Yeah,
slash.
abrasion. Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Understand. So let's talk about. We're still on the head and neck. Let's talk about the back of her body.
Okay.
Tell us what you observed on the back during your external examination. What did you observe on the back of her head, neck, shoulder areas?
Well, I already mentioned that the back of her neck, you could see a 3/8-inch abraded contusion, and also you had more of those petechial hemorrhages. But then on the back, you have a mixture of contusions and abraded contusions, and then you also have these area of confluent abrasions that actually have a different appearance than everything else. They have a more postmortem appearance.
Okay, so there, on the back itself, there was some antemortem
And postmortem.
and postmortem. Okay. And for those injuries to occur, would there have had to been some type of force? I'm talking about the postmortem ones.
Mm-hmm.
Some type of force or contact with the skin post-mortem that would have caused those.
So, because it's an abrasion, because it's on the skin only, it's like a friction injury by definition.
So if you're dragging something, a body that is already deceased, is it possible that...
Action leading.
Don't lead your witness.
What are your opinions about the whether or not dragging a body that is already deceased might be able to cause those type of injuries?
That's one possibility.
You talked about a palpable hematoma within the soft tissues of the face.
Yes.
But no fractures. Kind of talk to us about that.
So you could feel in some of those areas with contusion that there was some fullness in the skin underneath it. So again, just suggesting that either there's edema or swelling or blood in underneath some of those injuries. But I did not appreciate palpably or even on x-ray any fractures of her facial bones or her skull for that matter.
Given the amount of external injuries, was that surprising to you?
I don't make assumptions.
Understood. And yeah, I don't want you to make assumptions either. With regard to, is it common though that sometimes you might see fractures associated with these type of injuries?
I've seen it both ways.
Okay. You did note that this was no evidence of stomping injuries. Is that right?
I would never call it a stomping injury, but I don't see any fractures, both palpably or on the x-ray of her facial bones or skull.
So, but they would be consistent with this pressing you talked about?
Yes.
Gotcha. All right, let's talk about the trunk. Going on. Where do you, when you talk about the trunk in your autopsy, what are you referring to?
So I'm referring to the region of the body that includes the chest, the abdomen, and the back. So kind of the central part of the body.
Okay. And can you just briefly kind of tell us what evidence of injury you saw on her trunk area?
So some we've actually already covered. She had the same patterned braided contusions that looked kind of zigzag or tread-like across the anterior aspect of the neck and upper chest. She had an abraded contusion that was 1.5 inches of the just kind of overlying the right clavicle bone in this area. She had a 3 by 1 inches focus of band-like, so similar to a band, abraded contusions across the anterior aspect of the left shoulder. She had a cluster of petechial-type hemorrhages or abraded contusions on the left side of the chest, just medial of the left nipple, so kind of in this area. She had a 3/8-inch contusion and a 3/4 inch linear abrasion on the lateral aspect of the left side of the chest. She had a 3/8-inch pale blue contusion of the anterior aspect of her right hip. She had multiple red contusions measuring up to 3/4 inch on the middle of her upper back. And then she had these areas of kind of that tan brown confluent abrasions across the back. They were slightly more so on the right than the left side of the back. And she also had them on the posterior aspect of her right upper arm and her right elbow. And then she had more contusions on the left side of her upper back, abrasions measuring up to 1/4 inch on the left side of her upper back, a 1-inch abrasion on the right side of her upper back, and then a cluster of petechial type hemorrhages on the left side of her back, and then more abrasions on the middle and lower back. And then she also had a cluster of contusions that were measured up to 1/4 inch, so pretty small, but they're on the right buttock.
I'm not going to take the time to go in great depth about what injuries she had on her extremities, but did she have injuries on her extremities?
Yes, sir.
That were associated with, or would have been consistent with occurring during the same time as these other injuries?
That's possible, yes.
Okay. And is there any area of her body, other than potentially her right arm, that did not have evidence of injuries?
No.
Those photographs that we're referring to as far as the trunk goes, if you look at 260, I think we've already talked about that, but look at 264, 265, did those show some of those injuries?
You said 260 to 265?
Just 260, 264, 265 are the two that I'm wanting to look at right now.
Yes, sir.
And I want to specifically ask you what is depicted in State's Exhibit number 265.
So in 265, it's a picture of her entire back, again with the small tag that has the unique identifying number for her and the scale. And you can see kind of the multiple abrasions and contusions that I described on the back, including those areas of confluent abrasions that kind of have a different tan brown color to them that I think are postmortem.
So some were antemortem and some were postmortem?
Yes, sir.
And is it hard to fall down or whatever, if you bump up against something, is there going to generally be one particular place where it comes and impacts your body? If something, unless it has multiple impact points on.
Objection, leading your eye.
Sustained.
You understand what I'm asking you?
Let me rule on the objection. Your objection is sustained on lead the witness.
Yes, sir. With regard to the number of injury or number of points of force used just on the back, do you see, can you give an estimate of, just looking at it, how many there might have been?
I would just say multiple impact sites.
Okay. And these type of injuries that were on her back, are they the type of injuries that have what you would consider contusions that go into the musculature?
There's both abrasions and contusions, yes.
Are there multiple contusions as well?
Yes, sir.
You're right. You want to approach real quick? So looking at the rest of your autopsy, right now we're on page 3, continues on to page 4, and you talk about evidence of asphyxia.
Yes.
Okay. Because ultimately, what was your conclusion as to the cause of death in this case?
So the complete statement I made for cause of death, she died as the result of blunt force injuries with smothering and strangulation.
And so are smothering and strangulation a form of asphyxiation?
Both are, yes.
Okay. And so evidence of asphyxia goes to that conclusion, is that right?
Correct.
And so if you would kind of explain for us we've already talked, I think, about the generalized congestion, but other things that went into your opinion that for the evidence of asphyxiation.
Yes. So again, she has generalized congestion of the head and face. She's got petechial hemorrhages in her scalp, in her facial skin, in both of her eyes, in the gingiva, and even on the posterior aspect of her neck. And she also has petechial hemorrhages on the skin behind both ears. And then she also has florid petechial hemorrhages within the skin of the anterior aspect of the neck and upper chest. And then also, not to forget, she has those patterned abrasions, abraded contusions that go over the middle of her face, including her nose and mouth.
And so what would you call it if you have something where a person's airway is blocked? Is that smothering or strangulation?
Okay, so smothering is with the upper airway, the nose and the mouth being covered. Choking is the airway is occluded by like an object, or just something within the back part of the oral cavity. Strangulation, however, means that there's pressure on the neck, and you have the airway and the vasculature in the neck.
And so let's go a little further than just evidence of asphyxiation. You said with smothering and with strangulation. So let's talk about those two things.
Yes, sir.
What are the evidence of smothering, and what is the evidence of strangulation?
So your evidence of smothering is essentially you have these injuries that go across the nose and the mouth. So that would be supportive of that, in addition to all the features of asphyxia. And then furthermore, for strangulation, that's part of the looking at things internally. I don't know if you want me to go into that.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. We're not going to show any photographs to the jury of any internal examination, all right? But I do want you to talk about that with regard to how you can tell that there was smothering and or strangulation.
So the smothering I just covered. But for strangulation, there's a specialized dissection that we can perform where we actually look at the musculature of the anterior aspect of the neck, and we look at it layer by layer. And you're looking for evidence of hemorrhage in the musculature. And then in addition to that, you're looking at the cartilaginous structures of the airway. So if you feel here, the windpipe, that's what we're looking at. And sometimes you can see fractures of that in strangulation. But essentially I did that specialized dissection in this case.
Yes, okay. And you, and is that part of the evidence that you took into account as far as making your findings?
Correct.
Okay. Now, as you, so we had the evidence submitted we've already talked about, and then you talked a little bit more about your internal examination just a moment ago. But let's talk about that just a little bit further, and what other areas did you examine internally that gave you evidence of possible injuries?
That what I just described, the anterior neck dissection that I performed for her.
Understood. But there was also an internal examination of, say, the scalp, the skull.
Oh, yes.
Is that right?
Yes, correct.
And did that show some type of evidence of injury there?
So the scalp, I already mentioned previously that there were no fractures of the skull, but one of the things that we do during the autopsy is we reflect the scalp so that we can look underneath the scalp, and she had multiple points of bleeding underneath the scalp.
And what is it that causes that type of bleeding?
Impact.
Okay. And you said there were multiple points of bleeding under the scalp, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And so is it your opinion, what is your opinion based upon that, as far as the number of impacts?
Oh, still multiple.
Okay.
Okay, let's stop for lunch, okay? We will start back up at 5 after 1, or close to it. See you now. All right, everyone may be seated. Good afternoon. Mr. Berry, you may continue. Yes.
Dr. Dwyer, you take that sheet and says, no, just set it aside here. And then you have the one you removed, right? Hand me the brush. Thank you. Dr. Dwyer, with regard to these photos that we've been looking at, I'm going to name them off one by one so that we can, when you have a contact
Yes, sir.
sheet, so you know what we're talking about. State's exhibit number 231, 232, 233, 234, 235, 236, 237, 238, 239, 240, 241, 242, 243, 244, and then the one you took out was 245.
Yes, sir.
And that one's still going to be off. So 246, 247, 248, 249, 250, 251, 252, 253, 254, and then skip 255.
256, 257, 258, no exhibit for 259, 260, 261, 262, no exhibit for 263, 264, 265, 266, 267, and 268. Those numbers, which I just read into the record, are each of those, Dr. Dwyer, photographs that were taken by you during the autopsy of Athena Strand on December 3rd, 2022.
Yes, sir.
And do they fairly and accurately represent the injuries that you have been speaking to this jury about?
Yes, sir.
I will offer those numbers, which I just read into the record, into evidence at this time.
Any objections other than those previously given to me?
No additional objections.
Okay, those objections are overruled. States Exhibits 231 through 254. States Exhibits 256 to 258. States Exhibits 260 to 262. And States Exhibit 264 to 268 are admitted.
Thank you. Hand these back. Thank you. So at the end, we were talking about, or before lunch, we were talking about evidence of asphyxiation. I believe we've already offered into evidence these different items that were gathered during the autopsy.
Yes, sir.
Then you had the internal examination, and you talked about the, what did you call it with regard to the neck, tissues around the neck?
That's a specialized dissection, the anterior neck dissection, which was included in the description for evidence of injury.
Okay. And then you talk about the head. Let me go on to the next page, which is page 5. Tell me about the findings related to the head, if there's any additional findings that are relevant as far as this is.
So conventionally, with my autopsy reports and how our office organizes them, all of the evidence of injury will be in a section called evidence of injury. For the internal examination, that will be everything outside of the injury, so what's normal essentially. And I'll refer in certain categories to the C evidence of injury section, but at this point, it's just all of the quote unquote normal findings.
Gotcha. So those are not things that would indicate any additional injuries other than what you've already described in the earlier part of the autopsy?
No, sir.
Okay. So we're going on to page number 6. What are we looking at here in the middle of page number 6?
So during the autopsy, we will collect fluids for postmortem toxicology testing that is done in our laboratory at the Southwestern Institute of Forensic Sciences. I do not personally perform the tox analysis, but the results of their report will be incorporated into the autopsy report.
And essentially, were there any findings?
Negative for everything.
Right. So going on to page number 7, is this where your findings are summarized?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So let's go through those. Regarding the blunt force injuries, would you just read the letter and then what the finding is into the record for the jury?
So capital letter A are numerous abrasions and contusions of the head, neck, trunk, and extremities, including patterned abrasions and abraded contusions across the midface, anterior neck, and upper chest. Then moving down to capital B, focal lacerations of the lip and tongue mucosa. Capital letter C, acute subscapular hemorrhages. Capital letter D, acute intramuscular hemorrhages within the bilateral temporalis muscles.
Okay. Before we go on to that, I want to talk about these subscapular hemorrhages. Was there any, when you're looking at somebody's head, how do you describe the front, the back, the sides?
So we have whenever we're describing injuries in general, we follow what's called the standard anatomic position. So if you picture the standard anatomic position would be you facing me, arms at your side, but your hands face forward. And that's how we determine direction in a standard process. So front of the head would be the forehead, back of the head is the back, and then right and left.
But it would be the person's right, not your right as you're looking.
That's correct.
Was there any of those areas that did not have some type of subscapular hemorrhages?
I would say that there was relative sparing of the right temporal scalp, which is this area. Otherwise, you had subscapular hemorrhages under the frontal scalp, the parietal scalp's at the top of the head, and the occipital scalp is the back of the head.
And did those come from one or more than one individual impact?
That would be multiple impacts.
Now, with regard to the evidence of smothering and strangulation, I think we've covered that pretty good so far. Is there anything additional regarding that that you bring to the attention of the jury?
No, sir.
And then you have this number 3. What is the number 3 thing?
So, again, by convention, we typically will include some circumstantial information to the case. That's usually how we kind of end our findings. And in this instance, I noted per report the decedent was found dead and naked in a river.
And then as far as the ultimate conclusion, would you read that, please?
Based on the case history and autopsy findings, it is my opinion that Athena Strand, a 7-year-old white female, died as a result of blunt force injuries with smothering and strangulation.
And then regarding the manner of death?
Homicide.
And can you explain how homicide is different from other types of death?
So let me just, I think it's easier to sometimes define what's cause and manner of death. Ultimately, the reason why I'm doing an autopsy is I'm trying to determine why this person is dead, and I'm going to make a conclusion about the cause and manner of death. Cause of death is the injury or the disease that resulted in the person's death. Manner of death tells you how that comes about. So cause of death is free text, it's more wordy typically. Manner of death, you only have 5 options: natural, accident, suicide, homicide, or undetermined.
Based upon the injuries that you observed on Athena Strand, do you have an opinion as to whether or not she suffered pain and suffering as a result of these injuries?
Objection, Your Honor, beyond the scope of her testimony.
I'll let her answer.
Honestly, yes, I think she did.
Now I want to talk to you a little bit more about a specific picture, that one that we pulled out.
Okay.
And I'm going to show you some other photographs that have already been admitted into evidence. Oops, sorry. Dr. Dwyer, I am going to show you what has been marked as 4 different exhibits. State's Exhibit number 203, State's Exhibit number 204, State's Exhibit number 205, and State's Exhibit number 206. And I want you...
I'm sorry?
Excuse me?
Oh.
Now, you weren't here when these exhibits were admitted, correct?
No.
But was there some type of a photograph of a shoe that was submitted through to the Southwest Institute of Forensic Science?
Yes.
That was contained within the autopsy photos, even though it wasn't taken as part of the autopsy?
That's correct.
Okay. And did you have a chance to look at that compared to the potential injuries in the case?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I am I think we're going to just use number 206.
Okay.
And I want to just discreetly, if you would, just pull. Can she step down, Your Honor?
Yes.
All right.
Mr. Coble, if you or Ms. Anderson need to move, you're welcome to go to the jury.
Thank you.
Well,
Dr. Dwyer, I asked you to identify the photographs that were taken during the autopsy, which of the photographs that you felt best represented with scale the tread patterns. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And was that this photograph that's been marked as State's Exhibit number 245?
Yes, sir.
And then this photograph of a shoe tread pattern that has already been marked marked and admitted into evidence of State's Exhibit number 206. And just ask you if you were to compare it, I'm not asking you to compare these two, but if you were to compare, do you feel like these would be objects that you would like to look at if you were to compare these things?
So, yeah, if I was going to, yes.
Okay. I will ask if I can publish these to the jury.
yes, sir.
All right. And I just want to make sure we're careful that we don't put them in front of anybody but the jury. Thank you. You can retake your seat. What was that? There was it. Thank you, sir. May I publish a portion of State's Exhibit number 272?
I'm sorry, 270 what?
272.
Okay.
Page State's Exhibit number 272, this would be page 3, I believe.
Yes, sir.
And is this document, while you were doing it, injuries that you observed on the face
Yes, sir.
Now, we're not, it looks like a man in this picture, right?
Right. It's a standard body diagram that we use on our cases.
Gotcha. Okay, so, I'm not gonna ask you to go through these again, but these, if you take these in conjunction with the pictures, does it help explain the things that they're looking at?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so, like you documented a moment ago, you said the right side of the head was free of the subscapular hemorrhages, is that right?
Yes, sir.
But there's still evidence of injury on the right side of the head.
Yes, sir.
And then the next page being page 4 of that same document. And does this diagram show all of the different evidence of injuries that are throughout the body of Athena Strand that she suffered in this case?
Yes, everything but the head, because that's on the previous diagram. Yes.
And then this part right here, where it's up and down like that, what does that represent?
Those are the confluent abrasions that appeared post-mortem that I described previously that are on the back.
But all the other injuries other than that would be antemortem, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And then, I apologize, I didn't do this before, but I wanted to point out, where you talk about the tread mark patterns here, do you note that here on the nose area?
Yes.
And also over here on the cheek?
Yes, sir.
Absolutely. Cross-examination.
Thank you, Connie. Good afternoon, Dr. Dwyer.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for coming in today. I just want to follow up with a couple of things, and you have, forgive me if you've already testified to me. From your autopsy report, for the external genitalia, you found they were unremarkable,
Correct.
and the anus was also unremarkable,
Yes, sir.
and the perineum was unremarkable,
Yes, sir.
and that's the same area, right?
All in the same area. That's the space between, for her, the vagina and the anus. Yes.
Thank you. And you found no trauma to the vaginal labia,
I did not know.
and no trauma within the vaginal wall.
That's correct.
Vaginal hymen was present,
Yes.
intact,
Yes.
and unremarkable.
Yes, sir.
There was no trauma within the anus or the perineal skin.
Yes, sir.
And was it either you or the autopsy tech selected the sexual activity kit?
The autopsy tech.
And it was at that time during the autopsy.
That's done at the beginning of the autopsy, yes.
Okay.
But I looked before she did before she collected.
Yeah, I think you described how you began the autopsy by doing an overall viewing.
Yes. Yes.
You had noted in the autopsy report that her teeth were intact,
Yes.
and there were no fractures within the fissure bones.
Not that no, there were not.
The hyoid bone and the
Laryngeal?
cartilages were intact and unremarkable.
Yes, sir.
You also noted in your autopsy report that there were no broken or missing fingernails,
Correct.
and there were no fractures to the clavicle, ribs, sternum, pelvis, vertebral column.
No.
So you didn't notice any of the broken bones.
No.
And you are not a footwear and expression analyst.
No.
That's what it's showing.
Redirect.
Yes, Your Honor. What, if any, effect would it have, or do you know, what, if any, effect it would have for a person who was sexually assaulted, if they were unconscious or even deceased? Would the findings be different than they would be if they were conscious?
Okay, so you said conscious or deceased. I mean,
I
conscious
said
is
unconscious.
unconscious is still not dead though.
Yes.
Versus dead. Again, it's kind of back to the same antemortem versus postmortem injuries, in that if you had an injury and there was a lack of vital reaction or inflammation or hemorrhage, you would presume that if it was there and didn't have those qualities, that it would be postmortem. The point is, I didn't see any injuries to her genitalia.
Understood. And just because there's no visible trauma, does that mean that some type of sexual contact or sexual assault could not have taken place?
That's correct. That the lack of injuries does not mean that there's a possibility that sexual assault did or did not occur.
Thank you. No further questions.
Mr. Coe?
No, Your Honor.
May this witness be excused subject to any potential recall?
Yes, sir.
Any objection?
No.
Thank you.
Thank you.